It's a bit weird, isn't it? With the enormous amount of tanks currently existing, equipped with the latest generations of weaponry, electronically devices, and with the AI coming, it almost makes no sense on why countries should be using old-style tanks in their armored divisions. Well, we could look at the situation from another point of view. After the retirement from service, like almost everything about armaments really, tanks can't just magically disappear or be recycled easily. So what's the easiest route? Selling them. Even without the modern standard fighting capabilities, old tanks can still be used effectively in certain scenarios. In today's video, we are going over 10 World War II and post-World War II tanks that are still in service to this day. Actually, I got surprised that some units of these tanks were still working, to be honest, and even serve to this day. Number 10, T-34 from Russia. One of the most famous tank in history without any doubt. When introduced, its 76mm cannon was more powerful than many of its contemporaries. Its 60-degree slope armor was a real innovation at that time, on which most countries took inspiration from. Many variants have been introduced during the war and after, in order to meet the demand of the changing battlefield. Its superiority was such that the captured T-34 were repurposed by the Germans for their own use. The tank's triumph made it the most produced tank of the conflict. Beyond the borders of the Soviet Union, export models were dispatched worldwide, and although many have retired the tank since, Vietnam, Guinea, North Korea, Yemen, and Republic of the Congo are among those that still equip their armed forces with this enduring machine. Number 9, M3 and M5 Stuart from USA. The Stuart tanks stand as some of the oldest military vehicles still in active service. They were deployed by the Americans during the North Africa and Italian campaign, against the Japanese in the Philippines, and in the Eastern Front operated by the Red Army. Although they faced many difficulties in the conflict, especially in engaging enemy tanks, due to the main 37mm gun, air small size and lightweight made them particularly effective in jungle combat and harsh terrain in general. In late 1942, the Stuart's tanks started just taking part of scouting and screening missions, since the Allies aimed to include medium and heavy tanks in their armored divisions to fight in the front line instead. Following the Second World War, several countries adopted surplus M3 and M5 tanks, although the majority have since been retired. Notably, Paraguay remains the sole operator of the Stuarts, with 10 units active in total. Number 8, Centurion from Great Britain. This tank was introduced in 1945 as the primary British main battle tank of the post-World War II period, and it is widely considered to be one of the most successful tank designs. Deployed during a number of conflicts, including the Korean War, Vietnam War, and the Gulf War, the Centurion was immensely popular, thanks to its combination of armaments, armor, and maneuverability. The most produced variant is the Mark III, which was armed with an 84 or 105mm cannon, and equipped with enough armor to resist shots of the famous 88mm German anti-air and anti-tank gun. While the original version of the tank may long be retired, a number of derivatives continue to be deployed. This includes the upgraded Oliphant, operated by the South African National Defense Force. Number 7, M47 Patton from USA. While it may have only seen service with the United States for about a decade, the M47 is memorable for being the second main battle tank to be named for a famed World War II General George Patton. Developed from the M46, it has been built to replace the U.S. military's aging tank fleet. It featured a 90mm M36 main gun, along with a number of secondary armaments, making it among the most heavily armed tanks at the time. Despite being heavily armed, the M47 wound up being the only Patton tank to not see combat while equipped by the U.S. Army and Marine Corps, largely due to the introduction of the M48 not long after it entered service. That being said, it did see action with other armies. It was deployed by France during the Suez Crisis, and Jordanian forces used it against the Israelis in the Six-Day War. Most recently, it was used by Croatians against Serbia during the War of Independence, after which it was retired. Currently, Iran is the only country that keep this tank in the army, with 170 M47 and said to be operational. Number 6, M48 Patton from USA. Even though this tank is basically the same of the M47, but with a better turret, I decided to put it on a different spot for a couple of reasons. The M48 primarily saw use with the American forces fighting in Vietnam, and was equipped by NATO member countries in a number of conflicts, including the Battle of Mogadishu, the Iran-Iraq War, and the Six-Day War. This tank was widely exported. The tank's hull also became the basis for a wide variety of experimental utility and support vehicles, such as armored recovery vehicles and bridge layers. It was eventually replaced in the U.S. Army by the M62nd generation MBT, but the A5 variant does continue to see use in many countries. To name a few: Thailand, Iran, Greece, South Korea, Morocco, and Turkey. Number 5. T-54 and T-55 from Russia. The T-54-55 series is the most produced tank in history. Estimated production numbers for the series range from 96,500 to 100,000. I've lumped together the T-54 and T-55 because they're basically the same tank, just with a few minor differences. Unlike the T-54, the T-55 featured a right-hand cupola with a dome ventilator, but initially lacked a turret-mounted 12.7mm anti-aircraft machine gun. The T-55 also features a number of upgrades, including a larger engine, increased range, and better protections for those operating the tank. While relatively simple in terms of design, their existence during the Cold War led Western countries to develop new technologies for possible combat. These included the M60 and Britain's Royal Ordnance L7-100 and 5mm tank gun. Despite making up the majority of the Soviet military's fleet during the Cold War, the tanks have since been retired from service in Russia. That being said, they continue to be equipped by the armies of Afghanistan, Cuba, Ethiopia, Iraq, and Nigeria, among many others. Number 4. Type 59 from China. The Type 59 main battle tank is a Chinese-produced version of the Soviet T-54A tank. The Type 59 first saw combat during the Vietnam War, when China equipped the North Vietnamese army with hundreds to use against the M48 and M41 Walker Bulldogs of the American and South Vietnamese forces. Armed with a 100mm rifled cannon and 2 machine guns, some 10,000 were produced between 1958 and 1985, with just over half of that amount serving with China's People's Liberation Army. Among the oldest military tanks to remain in service, it inspired the development of China's first home-built MBT, the Type 69. Apart the Vietnam War, it also took service in the 1971 Indo-Pakistani War, the Sino-Vietnamese War, the Iran-Iraq War, and the Gulf War, among a number of other conflicts. Outside of China, which still has some upgraded variant of the tank in service, a number of countries still keep the vehicle in their arsenal. These include Bangladesh, Cambodia, North Korea, Pakistan, and Iraq, which still have the original Type 59 as well as a number of its variants in use. Number 3. T-62 from Russia. This tank was first introduced in 1961 as a further development of the T-55 series. It retained many similar design elements of its predecessor, including low profile and thick turret armor. The Soviet T-62 emerged as the first production tank to be outfitted with a smoothbore gun capable of firing armor-piercing, fin-stabilized discarding sabot rounds, significantly augmenting its firepower. In addition to the 115mm main gun, it featured a complement of armaments, including a 7.62mm coaxial machine gun and a 12.7mm anti-aircraft machine gun. The T-62 took service in the Sino-Soviet conflict, the Soviet-Afghan War, the war in Chechnya, and more recently there have been reports from Russia about the utilization of T-62 tanks during the country's ongoing invasion of Ukraine. Consequently, the T-62 can still be recognized as one of the oldest military vehicles that remain operational today. In the years following its introduction, several variations of the T-62 were developed, and the most successful are the T-62M and T-62M1. A handful of nations continue to operate this armored vehicle, including Cuba, North Korea, Iran, and Afghanistan. Number 2. Leopard 1 from Germany. Among the oldest military tanks to still see service is the Leopard 1, developed by West Germany as a replacement for the aging fleet of American M47 and M48 Pattons. It entered service in 1965, with 6,485 working models being produced between then and 1984. Developed in an era when heat warheads were thought to make conventional heavy armor of limited value, the Leopard design focused on effective firepower and mobility instead of heavy protection. It is equipped with a 105mm gun and 2 7.62mm machine gun. It featured moderate armor, only effective against low-caliber autocannons and heavy machine guns, giving it a high power-to-weight ratio. Despite being out of production for nearly 40 years, the Leopard 1 continues to see service across the world. Largely adopted by NATO member countries upon its introduction, variants continue to be operated by the armed forces of Turkey, Brazil, Greece, Ecuador, and Chile. Outside of its use by the Canadian Army during the war in Afghanistan, the tank also saw use during Danish peacekeeping measures in the Bosnian War, and it continues to make appearances in the ongoing Kurdish-Turkish conflict. Several variants have been introduced for this tank, and the most recent one is the Leopard 1A 5V. This is a Ukrainian local upgrade that features ERA blocks on the turret, front, and midsections of the tank, as well as an extendable cage with netting to protect the turret from drones. Number 1. AMX-30 from France. The AMX-30 officially entered service with the French Army in 1966, some 7 years after it was designed. While one of the oldest military tanks to remain in service, it's definitely not the strongest, as it sacrificed the quality of its exterior armor for increased mobility. At least that was the plan. Not long after it was introduced, it was discovered the AMX-30's transmission was hindering its overall performance. It carried a 105mm gun, able to fire heat warhead shells, a 20mm coaxial automatic gun, and a 7.62mm machine gun. In 1979, due to issues caused by the transmission, the French Army began to modernize its fleet of tanks to AMX-30B2 standards, which included a new transmission, an improved engine, and the introduction of the new armor-piercing, fin-stabilized discarding sabot round. This tank took service in the Gulf War and in the Houthi-Saudi Arabian conflict. The AMX-30 saw service with the French Army until 2011, being replaced by the Leclerc MBT. While no longer used by its country of origin, the tank and its variants still see service with the armed forces of Cyprus, Venezuela, Qatar, and Nigeria, among others. By the way, if you liked the video, please consider to support me by clicking the like and subscribe button. See you in the next mission.